that group is doing incredible work in Kansas City, and Parks and Rec specifically has been able to benefit from his energy and excitement. So I just want to share quickly a short video to show a little bit about what they're doing.
Matt, I can't hear sound.
Oh no.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna try this again. If y'all can't hear it, let me know.
No sound.
Oh no. So let me instead stop my share real quick, and I will share, see if I can do this differently. There we go. Computer sound. That's what I was missing. Let me try it again. If it happens again, let me know.
What's up, everybody? This is Wesley Hamilton. I'm the Executive Director of the Disabled But Not Really Foundation. I'm here at another Kansas City park, which is Harmony Park, located on 10th and Agnes. It has a spray ground, which will be open in the next couple weeks, so make sure you stay tuned to parksandrec.org. It also has accessible playground. The good thing about this is not only can you actually have fun and play around, the surface is good to roll on, so it's not complicated. Around this park, there are accessible entrances at each corner that includes curb cuts. So make sure you be mindful on where you park. The curb around the park itself is very low grade, so if you have the ability to pop a wheelie to get up on the curb, that might work great for you. But for anyone else that has mobility issues, just park closer to the corners of the park because there is accessibility for you. Some of the other amenities that this park includes, besides this amazing playground, they do have a swing set and they have a basketball court. There is not an accessible entrance to the court, but it is open to the community. There's also a water fountain that doesn't have accessible ways around it, but just a little bit of grass to get through. An exciting thing about this park is that the Salvation Army has become a partner of this park. If you want to know more about how to be a partner in the parks or what
I think I might be having some buffering challenges with
what that actually means, make sure you visit Parks and Rec's website or their social media to learn more information about it. But shout out to the Salvation Army for being a partner of Harmony Park.
So that's Wesley Hamilton, and he, for those of you that might not know, he's sort of a rock star in this scene for all the work he does. I know he has a speaking engagement website set up. So we reached out to him, but I know he's busy, so I totally understand. Another project I just want to feature, this was featured in the PAPI newsletter. We looked out for the We Go Swing, which was installed by a group called Landscape Structures. And there's another short video I'll play that highlights what that looks like. This is in Merriam, Kansas, in Chatelain Park.
Ability of the We Go Swing. It's something pretty cool because it's nothing I've seen before on the play space. I mean, this is an experience where we get to roll on this thing, turn around, and we get that feeling of, again, choosing where we want to go and how we want to use it. It's pretty easy to pop this things up, spin around, kind of get in our space, and then we can just be a part of play, be a part of controlling the experience a little bit, and get a sensation that we don't really get to see a lot of at the play space. This has never really been done before, so this is kind of uncharted territory. But this is also a pretty comfortable area for my chair. I have not had breaks on my chair in a long time. So for me, this feels pretty stable. It feels pretty secure. But this is also great for a lot of different types of chairs. We've got kids who use manual wheelchairs, kids who use their power wheelchair. There's space to fit, it's comfortable, and it's secure. We know we're not going anywhere during the experience. Oftentimes we see similar swings that don't necessarily meet standard, they don't meet code. So they have to be kind of put in a pin off to the side. And while those are phenomenal experiences and great to be a part of, it's a bit challenging because we're not included. We don't get to be on the play space. We kind of become a spectacle. So this is a really cool experience because it's in it. It's in the play. It's a part of everything else. We're still part of the play space, and it looks like something everyone would want to use. So it doesn't feel like it's one of those things that were created for people with disabilities specifically. It's something for everyone to use. This solution offers an awesome opportunity for partnership, for participation, and for collaboration. And that's honestly one of the best parts of play, is being with other people, that I can look at my friends, that we can work together to make this thing go, to get the swinging motion to happen. I think it's really, really important, especially in the world of disability, that we feel like we get to contribute, that we're not just being pushed around, that something's not being done to us, that we get to be a part of play. We get to imagine and control this thing as well.
And so the only other example that's like that, that I wanted to highlight real quickly, is the work that Wyandotte County has done recently. They last year constructed an all-inclusive playground out in Bonner Springs. And so you can see in this, there's a lot of references to the kind of things that the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan is supporting. And I'll put that link in the chat here in a second. But especially some of the conversations about making physical activity accessible to all users, and also some of the conversations you heard about partnerships. So how do you support this type of infrastructure? Well, partnerships can help. And so with that, I'll introduce Anthony, or I'll let Jen introduce Anthony, I should say. Jen, do you want to go ahead and give an introduction, and I'll stop sharing my screen?
Sure. So my introductions are usually pretty short and sweet. So I'm here to thank Anthony for being with us. Anthony with The Whole Person. We work a lot with this group with Casey Parks. Anthony, this is the first time I'm meeting you like kind of in person, so welcome. And I'll turn it over to you to talk about some of the work and projects you're working on in the community.
Yeah, thank you. So my name's Anthony Trakas. I work out of the Whole Person. I'm actually an advocate for accessible recreation and sports in Kansas City. My role is funded through the Health Forward Foundation, so I kind of have the freedom to speak my mind in most cases. Everything that, Matt just showed, I've been a part of actually, and I kind of will go into that maybe on my second slide. I have a few, and I don't think I'm going to have to rush through them since I'm the only presenter, but the work with West Hamilton and the parks happened because when COVID came around, everything shut down. Most of the disabled community relies on the city's resources, like Parks and Rec community centers, parks, things where people can be independent. And really the only facet of life left that was open for people to use was the parks. And so getting West Hamilton into the parks, which I've been the CFO of his organization for over 3 years, and just met with him this morning about, our program. It's an 8-week fitness program for mainly people on the east side or from demographics that aren't typically involved with adaptive sports. To be involved in adaptive sports, who had to have come from a certain background and gone to, in most cases, gone to rehabilitation that has created a platform of independence to even to be able to participate, as well as, a lot of people from diverse backgrounds not really liking sports in general, and they're more like weightlifters and fitness guys and girls. And so understanding, how to provide one of life's basic necessities, the opportunity for physical activity and just being outside, one of the basic resources that we should all have access to is our neighborhood park at like a bare minimum. It creates a safe place for the neighborhood to go, to be part of it, and to celebrate the diversity of our city. We're super lucky to have been based on the Kessler Boulevard system and have retained these beautiful green spaces as thoroughfares for our city. And so really fighting for integration and internalization of like the disabled community's participation in basic resources, parks programs, trails, you know, everything. And really spending a lot of time fighting off the like separate but equal treatment. You know, we'll create this great park over in this area that'll incorporate all these great inclusive ideas. Like, that's not what we want. We want to participate in the community the same as everyone else. So, you know, the ADA is 31 years old. So it's pretty old in the, you know, grand scheme of things. We've always been in this battle for rights where we had something before the ADA that wasn't enforced. Then we passed the ADA, and you know, 31 years later, it's somewhat enforced. There's hardships we can get around. I mean, I like to point out that we just poured concrete down the steps at Liberty Memorial to make that accessible. So, you know, getting away from these like engineer and architect requirements that the ADA puts forward and being more progressive and adopting universal design concepts that are usability by all, especially from my perspective with sports. Like, you know, people think that if a wheelchair can fit through a door, it's good enough, but you don't realize that people participate in sports in different types of chairs that are raked and have wheels going out. And so a tennis court, to be accessible, needs a very large door, not just a door that's ADA compliant. As well as, like, I've been on some of these meetings with infrastructure and streets and bike lanes, and it comes up like, well, a wheelchair user can use the bike lane. Well, a wheelchair user is going to be in a hand bike if they're going to be, you know, taking part in recreational activity. They're not going to be in their wheelchair. That's what they use. That's like, they're a pedestrian at that point. So I've only been in this role like a year and a half. I come from a corporate analytical background. I got a master's in finance and, you know, went down that banking route. But I think that I've quickly become like a very knowledgeable person on accessible recreation and sports, and that really incorporates everything from developmental disabilities, Special Olympics. Taryn Anderson and one of my coworkers have a great archery program out of the Brush Creek Community Centers that's all abilities. We have the Special Olympics here in town on both sides of the state line. We have a power soccer program we just started. It's the first one in Kansas City. Other cities like St. Louis have like 3 or 4 of them. So kind of getting us into, you know, the modern world in as far as program offerings go. But also incorporating like things that most people in our city aren't exposed to at all. And that's like our Paralympic track athletic programs. You know, we have a guy who works for No Motion who's on Team USA basketball team. And, you know, those programs are very isolated, a lot of times by choice. And some of the activities have been created specific to for the disabled community, like goal ball for the deaf and hard of hearing. We are lucky in Kansas City that we have a huge community of blind, low vision, deaf, and you know, schools out south. Johnson County is touted as one of the most accessible cities in America. Um, and yeah, so I'm willing to, have a conversation about anything, and, answer any questions you might have. And I have a presentation that I'll share because one of the things that jumps out at me when I'm reading over the playbook material is that, the soliciting feedback from the community, and, that's why I'm here. For better or worse, the whole person is kind of a representation of the disabled community, and so that's why we get invited to these conversations. And also, we have an ongoing survey that we've been doing for almost 2 years, to collect input from the community, people with and without disabilities and their access to recreation. And so part of this, I'd like to just show you guys the data and, get kind of tell you that we have this available. And as well as, asking for your help to push it out and collect more of it. Okay, so let me try and share this. Let's see. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, can you see the PowerPoint now?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm a little not that well versed in Teams, to be honest. Okay, so, and being a public advocate, I'm involved in everything, so I have an opinion about everything. But just to give you like what my official role is we at the Whole Person received grant funding from the Health Forward Foundation to help close gaps in the accessible sports and recreation sphere. We were given funding to create a bi-state, multi-sector collaboration of all the nonprofits and agencies here in Kansas City, and bring them together to share learnings, talk about the challenges, vet out. And I mean, one of the biggest thing that's come out of that is the partnerships that these people have developed, because they're operating in such isolation that, having Wes Hamilton and Casey, the marketing director of Casey Parks and Rec, in the same room together and, suggesting that they go into the parks. We brought Sporting Kansas City is now a sponsor of our Power Chair soccer program, creating these opportunities for people to connect and grow, to and the ultimate goal is to enhance the quality of life for individuals with barriers to participation through access to recreational activities that promote fitness, wellness, and social growth. I mean, I don't think I need to sell anyone on just like a moderate amount of exercise being, extremely beneficial to your mental health, as well as being, having this social outlet that you can participate in. But understanding that like all the challenges that you guys face, to try something new, like maybe getting involved in like Casey Crew and trying to row the claw, or, going trap shooting up at Parma Woods, like those kind of challenges that are barriers that you perceive are just magnified 10 times more with someone that has mobility issues, or has concerns for their physical safety, trying new things. Also understanding that like we're also guilty of promoting things as all abilities, and maybe it's not an activity that is able to be done by someone that's blind or deaf, not so much, but like understanding that there's a lot of challenges that are magnified. And then, all those conversations about COVID making things even worse, like that is exponentially true in the disabled community with like people with underlying health concerns. It's difficult to try new things. There's always an ace in the hole for an excuse that, you're having health complications. It's difficult for people to run successful programs because participation it's difficult to get at first, and then it's difficult to have consistency, and it's difficult to grow your program because of having to create like internal leaders within it. Okay, I'm getting off on a little bit of a tangent, but the basics of what we provide is a shared website of local organizations that provide inclusive sports and recreation. So we've created a directory, and my website's asgkc.net or .com, asgkc. And really what we're trying to do is create from a very ground level a community calendar of activities that people can participate in that are inclusive. And then a secondary kind of part of that is when people post calendar events, we need to know a little bit about your organization. And so it's also created a directory of local organizations, and kind of being the gatekeeper on people that are actually offering accessible programs and not simply like supporting it as like a mission. Someone like Bike Walk KC would not be in our directory because they don't actually offer the programs, they support them. So this is the thing on the right, the Community Gaps Survey, which we've been rolling out. I think you guys would find that incredibly engaging. It's data, so not that exciting, but tells us a lot about the challenges people are facing. This one's kind of fallen off, an accessible venue survey. A lot of talk at the beginning of barriers was like, we need to know before we go in somewhere what it's going to be like. Well, that's really difficult to do. And so kind of the plan is really to make that more of an editorial portion of our site where we kind of like have the top 5 venues here locally. I mean, I can tell you right now that like most of the adaptive sports programming happens out of Hy-Vee Arena because it was the only thing open for a long time. We've now developed an accessible and also provides some privacy and control and separation while still being involved. We've since developed some relationships with Parks and Rec where we've been using their community centers for programming. Some of their community centers are rehabbed from older schools and stuff like that, or like my local community center is the Aguirre Center, and is like, I think a high school architect student won a contest or something. It's just not well set up. And so this network of local organizations and bringing them together to face these barriers head on. So we have a quarterly roundtable meeting with the leaders of the organizations that are offering accessible recreation. We've made a huge effort to get Parks and Rec involved, and that has since expanded into the Missouri Department of Conservation. The Kansas Department of Conservation is in the process of creating their directory page. The Missouri side does things a lot better than the Kansas side as far as special populations programming go. But, unintentionally, a large portion of this ends up being government agencies because they are the ones taking a large, position to include everyone in the community. promote diversity, and then being a government-funded agency, they're required by law to offer that. So this is just a little, one of our quarterly meetings where we have, the leaders of Wounded Warrior Project, Special Olympics, the Conservation Department, the, Parks and Rec, just everyone, and then a lot of ones that you don't know about, like Midwest Adaptive Sports, and they're kind of like our Paralympic track organization here locally. I guess I should go back. I skipped over Educate the Educators, which is a great program. And so Midwest Adaptive Sports was a sub-grantee of our initiative, and they have this awesome thing where they take sports chairs into schools. They went to Center High School. They've gone like all over the city. I think they've done 15 school assemblies, like, touched thousands of kids, but super interactive school assembly that like they get the kids into sports chairs to get dominated by Paralympic athletes, and they have fun doing it, and to raise awareness, to like get kids more familiar with seeing people that are disabled, so they're not taken off by it, engaging. We see that as a huge theme in playgrounds with their features, and adopting what's called a parallel play, where kids can interact. Like, you want for a classroom of kids, for the child with a mobility issue to be part of the social sphere, at least around when the play is happening, so friendships and social support can develop. And the last slide match of Variety KC, like, they are the ones in town kind of doing that the best. Their resource development and partnership's amazing. They've partnered with Mahomes Foundation, and they've been doing accessible playgrounds around town, and really being progressive about adopting the parallel play, mindset. So this is a little bit about what we've done. I think Matt kind of showed you the work with Wes Hamilton, which has been really cool. And at the beginning, neither of them really understood like what we were doing there. And it was Leslie Alford, the director of marketing, filming it on her cell phone. And it took us like 5 parks maybe, and me to continue reiterating the message and what we were just trying to get people out of their homes and into the park. And then, a few episodes in, KC Parks and Rec is like, we're hiring a videographer to do this for us. This is great. But they kind of came up with the idea, like, we need these videos as part of our directory of parks. And so them taking the initiative to kind of take that to the next level has been amazing. And then opened up other opportunities for Wes and myself to grow that program. And we just created a mobile trailer with workout equipment where we're taking our 8-week program into the parks, so everyone can be a part of it, and kind of change parks and take the program to the people. And that has all, we've gotten the agreement to use the parks from Parks and Rec, and that's all come out of that. And so all this builds on itself. This is the actual We Go Swing in the left. That is in Chatland Park. The video we watched was just like their promo for the company that does it. It's such a cool thing. The director of Merriam Parks and Rec, which is like a step up from a volunteer position, given the size of them, they're just doing it because they're like passionate about it. She had the foresight to lock like $100,000 in funding specific for an accessible feature like this, and then continue to fight for it over the course of like a couple years to keep it for an accessible feature. This is one of the first ones I've seen that like fully adopts the kind of like parallel play attitude where you're completely independent in your use of it. It's kind of a workout, and but very costly. It's almost like it's a very costly installation, and so we're always faced with this challenge of whether things are economical to serve a smaller portion of minority population, and that's a conversation we are always having as a society. My personal opinion is having more multi-use um, features. We have segmented things into kids stuff and adult stuff, and I don't think that's necessarily the right thing to do. I see as many kids down on the Berkeley riverfront playing on the pull-up park as I do in the playgrounds. And we have seen some steps towards that with the AARP funded installation by Brush Creek Community Center. That is, progressive for Kansas City and for park-based fitness in general. It has things that, I would say in the last 15 years, a lot of the stuff we've put in the parks was geared towards the elderly. And, AARP has really, taken that um, to be applicable to all different abilities. And so it's just great to see something like that incorporates the stuff Kansas City's been putting in the last 20 years. And then some of the more private initiatives like the Berkeley Riverfront, which was a Port Authority project that, was for the diehard fitness people. And we occasionally, get, so this bottom left picture is someone that proactively reached out to us and was like, listen, I can't get into Parade Park. I'm blind. The access points are on the corners. I can't find them. And so, as these people reach out to the whole person, we're able to reach out to Parks and Rec, and then, they're like, well, what can we do? And this gentleman was actually like, well, I have this great idea. There's these things I use around my yard that are for driveways. Like, would you mind putting those in? And they're like, yeah, that sounds so great. So finding these like low tech solutions that are from the community, that are, easy wins. The right picture is these things called track chairs that both conservation departments have re- received funding for in the past and are extremely expensive, like 30 grand a piece, to provide people the opportunity to hunt and fish and enjoy nature and the resources that the conservation department has. Unfortunately, like the way they're funded, they're only allowed to be used by organizations. And so, us, and then a lot of times these programs, like, they have a couple $100,000 worth of accessible resources that are sort of buried down in the organization. Like someone was passionate about it. They don't have a role that manages those types of things. And so figuring out who to talk to get these into the community is a challenge. And then actually getting them into the community too, and following, the rules that the conservation department has, and, connecting them with the people that want to use them, as well as like providing a little bit different perspective on how they might be able to utilize, because, they know that they're underutilized. They want to do everything they can to get them out into the community. It's just they don't have the resources, as well as like the network of people that would be potential participants, to take advantage of them. And so having us be like, you know, this would be great for frisbee golfing in Swope Park or something like that, you know, and developing programs that are more inclusive to people that aren't hunters or fishers. So I guess, you know, if there's any questions you guys have about what's going on in Kansas City, what's going on with the parks, my opinion about anything, I'm totally happy to answer those questions. And then we can dive kind of into the survey we've been collecting, and I'll kind of go through some of the results. It might take like 10 minutes or 15 minutes, just to show you, like, you know, as these things in the playbook come up to solicit feedback from the community, this is something that's already there that you guys can push out. We have full creative control over it if we want to. We're constantly adding things, like someone wanted, like, we realized fencing wasn't on there. Fencing is a pretty popular, although extremely isolated, adaptive sport. So getting that on the survey, and then utilizing it. This initiative was created. My perspective is that this survey should be used by like all of Kansas City and their resource development for their accessible programs. Like, this isn't just for the whole person to use. And I think that's why it's important that, you know, ASGKC is like an advocate to grow programs and not sort of be entrenched in one or the other, because there's a ton of gatekeeping in the nonprofit world, as most of you probably know. So if there's any questions about what's going on in Kansas City, maybe anything specific. We created our first wheelchair softball field a year ago, north, like, which is pretty great. A lot of something I can think of that like no one knows about is we have last year we were one of 4 cities to be selected for a wheelchair football team. We have a professional wheelchair football team. They've since expanded that. I think there's 8 cities now, but we were one of the originals. I think maybe because we won a Super Bowl, but you know, they had to have us in there. And so that's like, there's articles out there, no one knows about it. And so, you know, any questions you may have, please ask. I'm willing to answer, and then I can dive into like the data.
Well, Anthony, that was a great start to the presentation, and we're glad we're giving you more time because you got a ton of stuff to share. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. Just so you know, Anthony, we'll definitely have a discussion after you wrap up, because I think there's a lot of conversation that we can have. So feel free, folks, if you have a question, ask it. Or Amanda, looks like you got your hand raised. Go for it.
Thanks, Anthony, for the presentation. Question. So, the organization I'm with, we work with different neighborhood groups and other like community development, economic development organizations. So, whether they are wanting to advocate for more accessible features in their parks and public spaces, or whether, you know, I personally want to advocate that they look at those things when they're improving parks and public spaces. 2 questions, like, I'm thinking, like, if we have data on the number of like residents surrounding a park or surrounding a specific public space that may have some sort of like mobility issues, that can help a grant ask, or even help like a PIAC request. So does that exist? Does that data exist as far as like where people live? And
Well, the only time we've really seen that happen is in at Children's Mercy Park, because the hospitals are so close. And so I don't think we only really have like data by county, and I think that what I have to say is that the park improvement process, in my opinion, just exposes a lot of socioeconomic inequity. Through the PIAC process, I personally gotten approved for ADA enhancements through the PIAC process. So that's like kind of broken in my opinion, because there's an ADA budget that's supposed to be used for that. Although the easiest way to get park improvement for accessibility is through the PIAC fund. But really, if you think about it, like, because the park's improvement process puts it on the surrounding area to fight for that improvement, to be proactive about applying for a PIAC, presenting to the PIAC committee. Like, just think about the type of neighborhoods that can make strong cases and the kinds that can't. What I encountered last year was, I was like, whatever, I'm just going to do this same thing in the East Side parks. And we're a proud city. People like to have control of their area and have a say in what's going on. And, you know, they didn't like someone from one district over coming and suggesting that they make their park more inclusive. You know, it has to be something that either happens as a city as a whole and is bigger than, you know, this PIAC improvement process we put in place, because it really takes it down to such a low level that it's difficult for parks surrounded by lower income individuals to fight to make it a strong case for their improvements. Where we've seen awesome things done is with the kind of engineering behind Kansas City and the water flood spill off, and I'm butchering this, all the engineers on the phone, sorry. But like them taking the initiative to create beautiful green spaces on the east side with the water department and kind of the Corps of Engineers, I've probably seen more improvement because of that stuff than for any individual's passion for fighting for improvements over there.
So with our current flawed system of PIAC, yes, I recognize and agree everything you're saying. But for an organization who, you know, a neighborhood association who may not have folks that are disabled or some sort of mobility impaired, like as part of their leadership team, how do, like, would just contacting the whole person for input on what they want to do in their park, like, would that be a good strategy? Or, I mean, in addition to obviously trying to find like people directly affected by what they're trying to do, like, you know, residents in their neighborhood, but like,
yeah,
in addition to that, like,
absolutely, the whole person and myself are like more than happy to you know, support initiatives, like, but you know, it is on the neighborhood association themselves to like take the focus. And then so what happened with the We Go Swing in Merriam is that they knew they wanted to create an inclusive feature, and then they reached out to us for like letters of support and why that was important in their community, so they could, you know, get the approval from their board or whatever. So we're happy to support any initiative that creates more inclusive parks. And, you know, we're a pretty strong presence here, so hopefully that's worth something. And, you know, and also understanding that like there are two different fights. That's the fight for features and the fight for the park to actually be accessible. The scorn of my earth is Truce Park Lake. I've been fighting for a $10,000 curb cut there for like 2 years. You know, it's like people can't use a feature if they can't get into it, if there aren't bus routes, and stuff like that. So just understanding that, you know, maybe just providing opportunity for someone to get into the park to check it out, maybe where you need to focus your efforts as opposed to like actually putting a feature in that would be like, you know, maybe underutilized.
Cool, thanks.
And any other questions?
Anthony, feel free to keep going. Just so we have time for a broader discussion. I know you still have some slides up, and I think they're really interesting. I looked at them earlier, so feel free to keep going, and we'll end with more questions.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna try and blow through this a little quicker. So basically, we have a community gap survey. It's a web form. We've had it for 2 years. We've gotten about 200. We get about 200 per year of responses. We put a social media campaign behind it. It asks a variety of questions, what type of person you are, and you know, and then gauging the response of people. So here's just the breakdown of the demographic. You know, 50% are a family member of someone with a disability. 25% of the respondents are people with disabilities, and then provider of services for people with disabilities was 13%. And then going down from there. We also had some focus groups that we ran to kind of help provide more feedback. We ran 4 of them. We had 11 participants, and really the big thing was like that they want social outlets in addition to these programs. And then what are the gaps that you're seeing, and really using the data to tell us, okay, you know, we as a group in our roundtables come up with these are the things we think are huge issues for the disabled community, barriers to entry, and you know, getting the data to validate those, or you know, be like, well, maybe this isn't as big of a concern as we thought. So definitely, you know, what is needed is things that make people feel comfortable trying new things. What the survey did support is cost, and I guess I'll go through these, but this is cost. You know, you can see our breakdown of respondents and where they responded, like 1 being not a barrier, 5 being a major barrier as we go down the rows. The column is kind of the breakdown or the distribution of responses. And so, you know, I like to dive down. The devil's always in the detail. So, you know, just because people think it's a problem, is it really a problem when we filter down to people with actually trying to participate? Yes, cost is a concern. You know, we're oftentimes on fixed incomes. This is playing around money you're spending trying CrossFit for the first time or something like that. So, you know, cost is always a concern, especially if it's, you know, just to participate in our yearly tennis program, or I'm wearing the Wheel It Forward. We have a USTA sanctioned tennis tournament here. You know, you have to foot the bill to get USTA approved as an individual, and then the entry fee for the tournament. So it can be, you know, a couple $100 just to participate in a weekend tournament. I think a big barrier for the cost is the equipment too, which maybe gets a little muddled, but really like equipment across the board, people have a concern with. It's difficult enough to get like a really great manual day chair. It's impossible to get a sports chair or something that would allow you to participate in sports. That's all done through altruistic funds in national, and not that it's particularly difficult to secure that funding, but it's not something that is just provided to people and is something that is needed to be able to participate. Transportation is an interesting one because everyone always thinks transportation is like a huge concern and that it's hard for people to get around. And what we really saw in the survey is that it's pretty split and focus in like why everyone thinks this is a big concern, but the data is not telling us that. And it actually does make sense when you take it to more granular level, like people with sensory developmental issues, blind, low vision, those are those red bars. They rely on bus routes, the time in bus routes. It's hard for them to go to evening events. And then, people that are involved in interested in participating in wheelchair basketball or wheelchair tennis are typically in a pretty independent part of their life already where they've sort of figured out their basic needs. So, just the kind of interesting learning from this, like, yes, transportation is still an issue. It's just a more specific to certain demographics. And then that's the end of my presentation. So I know I spilled the guts. I felt like I could be the only person.
Anthony, that was awesome. Like, sincerely, that was really, really great information. Jen, do you have anything to start us off with? And then I want to connect a couple people that I know are on the call. And then you could probably, I think, because we can see ourselves now talking. Let me see if I can take over the presentation. But Jen, do you have a question to go with?
I think, Anthony, maybe my only question would be, is there one specific project that you'd like to highlight? There was a ton of information, but is there anything you're working on currently that you want to talk to us about briefly, and then maybe we can open up to discussion and questions?
I mean, it's just
It's hard.
I
Yeah.
have my hand in everything at this point, but I think the most important thing is developing our East Side parks to the level that some of our gentrified neighborhoods have experienced, and creating that safe place for people to go.
I guess just a follow up, just because I'm personally interested. Are you familiar with the KC Parks and Rec Quality of Life Improvement District
Yes.
that we just implemented? Okay, good.
Yeah, and I also have an opinion about that. We tend to squeeze things in next to Children's Mercy to be part of this one zone, and that's not the purpose. It's to get into the communities, Spring Valley Park, not developing those parks on Linwood and deep, we have this great corridor of par 3 course looking parks, and making them nicer and not kind of adopting the separate but equal treatment where we're oh, we already got this going on, and by Children's Mercy, let's just expand on that because it fits into the QLID. I mean, I'm in the west side. I don't know if downtown's in QLID, but that would be a crime if it is.
It's not.
Okay, good.
So the QLID district for KC Parks and Rec is based on the 6 zip codes defined by the health department, and a lot of them are they're all on the east side of the city.
For some reason, I think mine might be on there though, 64108. And okay,
It's not.
Great.
Don't worry, you're not included, unfortunately.
And I can't tell you guys how thankful I am that Parks and Rec has taken this stance. 2 years ago they hired someone that was Taryn Anderson to focus on inclusion, and seeing more organizations have that as part of a pillar of who they are makes my job a lot easier.
So building upon that, and that's a great point. There's a few other people on the call, and I just want to put some spotlights on them because they probably are very interested in thinking through how they can connect with what you're doing. So Donna texted me this morning. Donna Guerra, she represents Groundwork NRG and runs. She's the community sidewalk mobilizer for Eastern Wyandotte County, which has some of the same park challenges of Eastern Kansas City. And so Donna, maybe just share what you're thinking, because I know one of the challenges you have is accessibility with sidewalks and infrastructure. I know firsthand there's a lot of ADA curb ramps that don't lead to sidewalks. What is it that you're seeing, and how does that relate to accessibility?
Matt, you kind of cut off there, but I'm assuming you're referring to me, right?
Yes, go for it. I was just asking about your experience with accessibility and the sidewalk work that you're doing, and then the walking clubs.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Donna Guerra. I'm with Groundwork NRG. I am the Walk Waco Community Coordinator, and this has just been such a great conversation to have. Thank you, Anthony, for sharing your story and all the projects that you guys are working on. When I think about accessibility, it's interesting because we've recently collected new data. I went into a Parkwood neighborhood where we had recently conducted a walk audit, and I was just basically revisiting to get new collected information. And we actually saw a couple who both of them were in a wheelchair, and it looked like they were a married couple, and they were asking what we were doing in the community. And I said, well, we're auditing the streets for sidewalk accessibility, creating more safer streets, if you will. And the first thing that they asked was just that, like, hey, can we create a tennis court where we can be a part of watching our kids and whatnot. And I thought about that as soon as you were mentioning, some of the things and projects that you guys are working on is how do we make those more accessible for the community in the Northeast KCK area. I've recently launched a new park survey as well, and we've not gotten the feedback that we wanted to. And so just really thinking about this when we're thinking about creating new infrastructure for our park systems in the Northeast KCK area, because right now, a lot of our parks, we can't even walk. I mean, a lot of my activities are promoting walkability and promoting more walking and physical activities, but there's no, infrastructure for those things. So just kind of opening myself up to thinking more about accessibility and how that can, be a huge contributing factor to why people aren't using our parks, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, raising awareness once we do create that access is important. And we have Tyrone Weaver involved with us from Wyandotte Parks and Rec. So, and yeah, like every Parks and Rec department has different levels of resources. And so just kind of having inclusion and accessibility, because it promotes diversity, to be a thought that's, not an afterthought is all we ask. And we love promoting stuff like sensory friendly swims, and it doesn't have to be, a $100,000 accessible swing to tell the community about. A lot of the stuff we've done with West Hamilton was just really like they had put a walking path around.
That's great. I know also, speaking of other county parks and recs, Allison Smith is from JCPRD. And so Allison, I was curious the commentary about inclusivity and programming. I don't know if you're on the call and able to unmute, but feel free to, is there anything that you all are doing in Johnson County that's related?
Hi, Matt. Yeah, and we've actually had someone from the Accessible Sports of Greater KC come out to JCPRD. They work with Jody. She's our special events coordinator. And so they have a whole league and they have a lot of athletes that do Special Olympics. This group actually met with our Kansas City Corporate Challenge team as well to make sure that we're still offering some of those events that are still eligible for all athletes. And it's been great. So we kind of do a little bit of everything right now. But our Special Pops coordinator, she does a lot of programs for that. And it's awesome. So yes, we are doing some adaptive sports as well.
And yeah, I'd like to, give you guys props for doing great things here. And really, we're kind of trying to bring some of the other parks and rec departments like up to your guys' level.
For sure. And if you ever need a connection to get in with any specific agencies, Anthony, just let me know. And I'm more than willing to give an introduction or a warm handoff to those guys, just let them know how you've been able to help us with some of our programs to make sure that we're accessible for all.
Well, I have Jody McMahon involved.
Yeah.
She's one of my partners, and so yeah, I think we've gotten the right people there, and love the Challenger League from the Y out there, and there's some just great things happening in Johnson County, and kind of, you know, because you have a lot of very independent disabled people, and you know, kind of helping to create something like that in other parts of the city would be our goal.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know Jody's got a great following, and she works with you guys and then a few other coordinators as well, just to make sure they've always got something going on. So they're doing great work. You guys are doing great work, and I really appreciate all that you guys are doing to help get these programs up and going.
Thanks.
So I was gonna plug one more person, but he just logged off. Blake is with the Unified Government Wyandotte County's Infrastructure Action Team, and he's worked with Kendra Burgess a lot, and with her policy work. I was just curious, are you in the loop on any of the complete streets or infrastructure level work that's been going on across the region with what you all are doing?
Yes, a little bit. Kendra has me fill in for her when she can't make stuff sometimes, so I've gotten roped into a few things. But I'm a disabled bicyclist here in Kansas City, so I have like a strong opinion about everything. Like, I'm living it.
So I'm curious, one thing that this group wanted to do at the end of every conversation is see how things like the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan could be better informed by those experiences. And so I know we can certainly share in the next newsletter the community gap survey so more people can take it. There's other ways to do it. One question I have for you, though, and maybe others on the call, feel free to chime in, but how can the KCPA plan better promote the types of concerns that you're talking about that maybe don't often get brought up?
Well, I do think that the just verbiage of inclusion is missing from the plan in general. You've included pictures of like wheelchair basketball and stuff like that. And then, inclusive sports and recreation, like it's almost every sector of the plan because it starts in schools and, except for faith-based organizations, but, this could be our religion. And so, yeah, just kind of incorporating broader concepts of inclusion into the plan, just mentioned. And, I think that we are in a great progressive city that can take things past the ADA. The ADA is 31 years old. Like, we have figured things out since then, and we can adopt concepts of universal design that is usability by all.
That's awesome. Well, generally we wrap up the last 15 minutes of every meeting that we have as kind of an open forum. It's kind of the meeting after the meeting. So folks that want to join in the conversation, feel free to. If you got to drop off or you want to take a break, go ahead. I will share some personal news. This is the second to last week of my time at Children's Mercy. I'm actually leaving to go join the Unified Government of Wyandotte County and support as the program manager for their Health Equity Task Force. So I don't know yet what all that means for me long term, but I'm going to continue to bring a lot of the KCPA plan with me in the work that I'm doing because I want to continue to see physical activity, especially in where I'm going next. But that's one reason Robin's joined us today. Robin, feel free to jump in and share some thoughts because I know you're directly related to this conversation about the KCPA plan itself.
Yeah, so, first and foremost, we want to, of course, thank Matt for all of his help over his time with Children's Mercy and bringing along the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan, and specifically, of course, for this group. nothing changes, of course. This group is not going away. Nothing else is going away. We'll just, I'll be filling in for Matt probably for the next several months until we get some his replacement hired, but that's okay. We'll continue moving forward.
Well, I've certainly had a blast getting to know you all, and I know sometimes our meetings are bigger than others. But Anthony, I did do want to extend just to start the conversation, the meeting after the meeting conversation. Robin, you're leading up with the sports sector. Any thoughts on what the Accessible Sports is doing that might cross over?
Yeah, absolutely. And Anthony, I'll send you a follow-up message, and maybe we can chat just a little bit more. We're the just as a bit of a background, with the plan, with the KC physical activity plan, we've been bringing sectors on at different stages. And so this particular group, they completed all of their work last year and have just continued to meet and discuss new projects. The sports sector is about a year behind, or at a different year delayed. And so we're developing our strategies and priorities right now. And so now is the perfect time to that we're bringing in as many voices as we can. And so we'd love to get your thoughts and if you have time to sit in on some of our meetings. So I'll follow up with you individually if that's okay.
Absolutely. And out of curiosity, do you have Mark Fisher involved from Children's Mercy?
Yes. We've got several Children's Mercy physicians, including Mark. I don't think he was able to make our last meeting, but yeah, we've been connecting with him. Yeah.
Great. Well, I know there's more connections that can be made. I'm just curious because Amanda asked a question earlier, and Anthony, while we still got you, for a lot of neighborhood groups that don't have accessible sidewalks, what's the best strategy you've seen? Because that's something we see consistently in KCK too. And I wonder, Amanda, if that's kind of what you're getting at a little bit. Is it really PIAC? Is that the best way? Or is there like you said go beyond ADA. Is there a policy that the city ought to consider adopting?
I think this is one of those questions that Kendra is so much better answering than I am. Like, I'm sorry. I think I can talk to the features in the parks, but like the access to the parks, I know a little bit about. But then when we go to just sidewalks and stuff, like the geo bonds and stuff, and how that's all funded, like, you know, is something I'm not sure I want to get involved with.
That's fair.
I have a quick follow-up question on that about thinking about accessible sidewalks. Anthony, my name's Haley. I'm a landscape architecture student. I actually just graduated officially yesterday. But thinking about thanks, I defended my thesis. But I've been looking a lot at Kansas City and the kind of the different factors that impact like park access, and one of the things I was looking at is just the topography around KC is so intense with the slopes and things that I was looking at a slope map, and a lot of the sidewalks slope-wise were what would be considered an ADA ramp in their like steepness of, if you were to construct that near a building, you'd require railing. So I'm curious from a user standpoint, from the like people that you've worked with, what the from a practical standpoint, what does that mean for park access? If maybe the sidewalks are accessible and that they have, you know, curb cuts or curb ramps, and you know, they're wide enough and materials are fine. But as far as the terrain being so intense in some of these neighborhoods that do need sidewalk upgrades, kind of what, from a practical standpoint, how do you navigate that?
Well, you know, we can't really do anything about the grade of our streets, but I think what's important, and so like a lot of times it's just like doing the best we can with what we have. And I think if we have a steep street, you know, just creating a sidewalk. But if you're from Kansas City, you know that there's another way to get there. You don't have to walk up the big hill. And, you know, so creating alternate routes that maybe add distance but increase safety and usability. I see something like the streetcar, you know, to connect areas so we don't have to try and get up a big hill. Like once you're up the hill, you're, you know, the usability and accessibility is there, and making sure that the sidewalks, and so kind of creating these isolated areas that are then interconnected by technology would be, you know, what I would think our city would benefit from. And then really, like, I mean, curb cuts are the biggest deal, and then paved surfaces, just because it's very difficult to use a wheelchair or a mobility device with something that's not paved.
Right. Awesome. Thank you.
Question two, you know, I mean, we're focused on parks, but there's also like sidewalks that are out of parks. There's also like new housing developments where accessibility isn't really discussed or even required when, you know, projects get tax abatement or incentives or any sort of public money. Is there like, are there good examples in other cities of some sort of like blanket requirement when there's any sort of like park improvement or public dollars invested, that there has to be that at least like not necessarily a feature, but the actual like park has to be accessible, or if there's a feature added, that feature has to be, well,
that's just the ADA.
That's it.
That's really just the ADA. I'm not that knowledgeable about other cities, and I think that's why I suggested Mark Fisher, because he's done a lot of time studying Ohio, like places that are doing things right. You know, I would personally, like, I have lived in other cities where places were required to put a certain amount of capital on the arts, and when they build, and why, you know, we couldn't do something like that. And I think with universal design would be, I think, more progressive than saying like you need to spend this amount on ADA things, because, you know, they maybe don't spend it in the right places, or just have to, you know, but I would love to see something like that. And I think that it would, like, you know, as much as we talk about Kansas City and how much our bikeability and walkability of our city is important to us, like having something like that to promote universal design in all of our buildings, and then hopefully have that incorporated with the Kessler Boulevard system. I mean, it'd be like, I just think it would be good for everyone, and it's kind of like putting our money where our mouth is, because at that point, it's kind of what needs to happen. We know we're dumping all this funding and money and stuff into bike lanes, and bicyclists haven't increased. So, you know, thinking about making its impact.
Amanda, your question makes me wonder, and Anthony, you might not have any awareness of this. I don't know if anyone's doing this, but in housing policy, I've seen a lot of interest in community benefit agreements, where developers building new properties, the community makes an agreement to say you need to upgrade something around us. I'm wondering if there might be a template for community benefit agreements, so that when new housing gets built, they upgrade the accessibility of the adjacent park or adjacent sidewalk or intersection or crosswalk. I don't know if that's even a thing that exists yet, but I'm wondering if that's a possibility. I mean, how do you get people to do it willingly is a challenge.
I mean, that's a great idea. If someone develops something like around a commercial district, that they have to add something to the commercial district, like parking or something like that.
It makes me wonder, you keep using universal design. Is there any universal design standards that you go to for when you're looking for that? like the technical or the kind of the verbiage, the language that you reference frequently?
No, I've read like one or two articles, but it's really just my opinion.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just another thing, like with housing, you know, on KCMO, like we're advocating for the Housing Trust Fund and what it should look like and what it should fund. And, you know, one of the requirements that that we have as a scoring criteria, but that we may want to have as an actual requirement for receiving any sort of like public funds out of the Housing Trust Fund is universal design for any new housing projects. I think like, I don't know, I'm guessing like rehab projects, like rehab of multifamily apartments would be harder, but at least like the requirement of that. I know St. Louis, that's one of like the 5 things that they require for their Housing Trust Fund is that any project receiving those funds has to have universal design. And so I'm just thinking like, that's probably something like LISC can advocate for more as a requirement, not just like a scoring criteria.
And yeah, and we have a guy at the Whole Person named Travis Rash,
he's on it. Yep.
Whole job is housing, and I always talk to him about, you know, the tax credits and turning land bank houses into accessible, you know, housing, and like, you know, the habitat houses and all of that. It's all great. I mean, unfortunately, our city is funding luxury condos, so until that stops happening, what do you want me to do?
Just as a question mark, I know the documentary, is it Crip Camp?
Yes.
It was really interesting to watch. There's incredible stories told. Do you see an organizing group like that able to bring up some of the accessibility issues? Because I imagine they went through so much to get to where they got to. Is there a local push like that happening?
Well, that's the Whole Person is that the equivalent of the organization in that film. It's a center in independent living. And so I will say that I've only been in the industry for like a year and a half, and it does seem to have shifted somewhat from the advocacy platform to more of like a providing health services, because of how much like welfare programs there are. The center in independent living, you know, a large portion of what we do is like facilitating those programs to the community, and advocacy has become a smaller portion, but they're like people like me and Kendra and Travis are still around fighting the good fight. And I highly recommend the movie. Usually when I'm trying to explain like where I work and what I do, I ask people if they've seen that movie.
It's a great film for any of y'all that haven't seen it, so I can put a link in the chat for it, but it's well worth a watch. Anything you want to leave us? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just said I agree.
Got it. Anything you want to? Any final thoughts you want to leave us with, Anthony? People, you know, generally walk off at 2 p.m. So, any final words of wisdom or encouragement, or what we can do to help you?
I just think that like Kansas City, we're in a great spot where we have like a kind of more of a blank canvas than filled one, and we're in such a unique opportunity to like, you know, leverage the history of one of the greatest cities in the country to like create a more forward and progressive one that's like a world-class, you know, Paris of the Plains, just like we were 100 years ago.
That's great. Well, thanks for joining us, Anthony. Really, really grateful for your time and great presentation. So we'll make sure everyone has access to this recording. We'll share it later. I'll stop recording. People feel free to chat, stick around, but if you got to log off and go on, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.